Hey folks, it's Christopher here from Neon Captain, and we've been getting a lot of questions about how the radiator handles color, so I thought I'd make a quick tutorial to help everybody out. It's really important, first off, to remember that the radiator handles two different color modes. The radiator supports traditional RGB, which is what you'd expect to find in any sort of laser control system. But we also support HSV, hue, saturation, and value, which is kind of non-standard but lends itself to a lot of really cool laser effects. So let's get started. I'm going to start by putting the radiator into default mode by holding down Shift and hitting Reset. And that just kind of puts everything into the base configuration. I'll make sure that the LFOs are turned off. And let's start with RGB color mode because that's the thing that you're probably most used to. So hit select on the color module, and then by using the menu select and menu value, navigate over to RGB mode and make sure that it says RGB and not HSV, and just use the value knob to change that. Okay, so now we're in RGB mode, and the top three knobs in the color module represent red value, green value, and blue value. So let's start by turning those all down except for red. And now we have a red circle. The circle is being generated by shape A, which is just default when you reset the radiator. And by rotating the red knob, you can see we dim and brighten the red value in the circle. And we can do simple additive color by adding green to get yellow, and then adding blue on top of all that to get white, or if we turn green back down, we get purple. So pretty standard stuff. And you can also control these values with the signal from the LFOs. So let's start by turning on LFO 1, and then we'll hold down select and turn the size control up on shape A, but make sure that the level on LFO 1 is set to 100, and then just turn the speed a little bit, and you can see we've got this red circle that's growing and shrinking based on the sine wave output of LFO 1. So now if we hold down select and turn our color up, and now I'm letting go of select and I'm turning the color all the way back down, meaning that the color value for the red channel is only derived from the signal coming out of LFO 1. And you can see as the circle grows and shrinks, it fades in and fades out kind of as expected. And if we increase the speed of this oscillator, the brightness of the circle in relation to the size of the circle remains consistent, as it should, because all of that's coming from LFO 1. And of course, we can use additional LFOs to control the value of the other color channels as we're doing this. And we can get some pretty cool effects. So I'm just going to reset the radiator again. And remember, every time you reset the radiator, it resets back to HSV mode. So HSV mode changes the operation of these controls. Instead of red, green, and blue, the controls now become hue, saturation, and value. And so by changing the hue control, we walk through the color palette. Saturation control fades from white to full color, and value or brightness controls the intensity of the overall output of the radiator. So this is really important. If you want to do chopping, you can tie an LFO to value and do some pretty cool stuff. Now let's go back to our earlier example where we have LFO 1 controlling the size of shape A. So I'm going to hold down select here and turn size, so the radiator knows to route the signal from LFO 1 to the size of shape A. Make sure that the level is set high, and then we'll just change the speed a little bit. And now, when we hold down select and turn the hue knob, you can see the shape changes color. It rotates through the color palette based on the signal from LFO1, along with the size of the shape based on the same signal. And if we turn the speed up, you can see that it remains, the color change remains in sync with the size. I'm going to just slow this down a little bit. And we can do the same thing. Let's hold down select and turn hue back to the left now, which unroutes that signal. And now we could route it over to saturation instead. So you can see the color fades to white as the shape changes size. And we could do the same thing to intensity. Or we could take, say, LFO3 and route that over to intensity. And then remember to turn intensity all the way down and drive it only from this LFO, and you get some cool chopping effects. Okay, so nice and easy, and it's just, it can be a little confusing until you realize that we do both RGB and HSV. So let's reset the radiator now, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to make sure that we're back into RGB mode, and let's talk about some of the color effects that we have. The first one will be chop. So I'm going to take LFO1, assign it to size, just so we have some motion going on here. And then I'm going to turn these down all the way, except for red. Okay, and we'll hit select here, and then use the selected value here to make sure mod type is set to chop, and then turn modulation on. And so that's killed output. And what happens now is these are RGB levels, but these are choppers which control the intensity of that level. So this is for red, this is for green, this is for blue. And as we turn the modulation controls, we can see that we're chopping up that output, and we can just keep dialing this up until we get an interesting harmonic relationship between the chopping, the frequency of the draw speed, and the frequency of the size change. And now let's add a little green. So I'm turning the green value up, and now I'll turn the modulation control, which is chopping. And one thing to remember is by default these controls are in coarse mode. So if you hold down Shift and then drive a control, you have a much finer granularity. So if you're trying to fine-tune a frequency, it's really the way to go. And now let's do the same thing with blue. Now once you've got an interesting color effect, one of the things that's fun to play with is the speed control of the shape that you're drawing. You can get some really cool effects by changing this frequency control. And also something that's fun to do is if you hold down select here and turn the speed control here just a little bit, you change the draw frequency of shape A based on the output of LFO1, and you can get some kind of cool color swirly effects. So experiment with that a little bit and just play around, and you'll discover all kinds of fun things. So I'm going to reset the radiator now. And not only does the radiator support chopping, but it's got a number of other kind of non-traditional color modulation effects. And let me demonstrate one of those real quick. So I'm going to hold down select on LFO1 and route the signal back into shape A, just so we've got something interesting to look at. And I'll slow this down a little bit. So now if we hit select and we can control the modulation effect by either using the mod type here or over here in the menu, but let's do it over here. And now you can see that I've selected X wave. So that's just kind of a nice one to start with. So let's hit modulation on. And now these three parameters control the aspects of that modulation type. So I'm just gonna, I'll turn P2 up to 100%. And I'm going to turn P1 up to about 21%. And P3 I'll turn to 8%. And you can see it's doing some interesting chopping. And then I'm going to take LFO1 and direct it to hue. And I'll just speed this up a little bit, or maybe even turn this from a sine to a ramp wave, and then dial up a nice modulation harmonic based on the frequency of shape A. And you can see we get some really kind of wacky and beautiful color effects. And by experimenting with the modulation controls, you have a pretty profound range of effects that you can dial up. Look at these moire patterns, really, really nice. And you know, drive around and experiment with the different modulation types. There's some really cool stuff that I think you've probably never seen in the laser world. But just have fun, and hopefully this has been kind of helpful. As always, you know, hit us up on Facebook if you've got any questions, or you know, post some cool stuff that you're making to the Radiator Facebook group, and have a good time. Thank you.